So, welcome to the Society for Italian Historical Studies highlight series, where we feature some of the interesting work being done in our field, including that of our prize winners. I'm Amanda Madden, and today I'll be interviewing Michael Martoccio, postdoctoral researcher with the European Physical Military System Research Group at Oxford, this year's winner of the Article Prize in Medieval and Early Modern Studies. Welcome, Michael, and glad to have you with us today, and congratulations.
Hi. Nice to be here.
Yeah, it's fantastic that you're here. So if you could just give us a brief rundown of your article, The Art of Mercato, which is fantastic, by the way. I really enjoyed reading it. And tell us a little bit, how does this research fit into the broader research project that you're currently working on?
Sure. Well, first off, thanks so much. This is great. I hope I hope that we have a nice conversation, and just thank you again for inviting me.
You're so welcome.
Oh, yeah. So yeah, the article is, as you might imagine, part of a larger project called Leviathan for Sale.
Great title.
Thanks. Yes, I did once have a picture of it on a presentation, and I had Hobbes's Leviathan, but I replaced one part of it with a just giant for sale sign.
Nice.
And so what I'm really trying to do in the book is write a kind of new history of Renaissance political geography and state formation by looking at this kind of unusual and I think overlooked part of Renaissance political culture, what I call the market for city-states.
Sure.
The buying and selling of cities by various Italian powers. I'm sure most of the people who are kind of listening to this interview know this, but the political geography of Italy from 1350 to 1450 radically changes. Right? Yeah, you go from something like 100 kind of tiny communes and feudal lordships to a few regional states, so Florence, Venice, Milan. And this process of regional state formation is essential for a lot of historiography, right? For people who study violence, for most, political thought, diplomacy, all these things.
Sure.
So I was always interested in that, and that kind of when I began my dissertation research, I knew I wanted to do a project in that kind of space.
Sure.
But what I kind of quickly realized was that actual process of how you go from, Siena, from let's say Tuscany, where you have Siena and Arezzo and Pisa and all these kind of tiny polities, to just Florence, the Duchy of Florence, that this process wasn't actually that well understood.
Sure.
And what I came to realize is that this process of territorial enlargement, actually a lot of the time what these larger regional states were doing is they were not conquering their neighbors, but they were just buying them. Yeah.
No, I was just saying that was one of the fascinating things after reading the article that I had actually never considered is, the fiscal picture of the consolidation of states and, going and saying, we're going to buy you. I thought that was really, really interesting. Yeah,
it really, it's worth kind of saying, when I say buy, I really do mean buy, right? I mean, everyone kind of gets together. There are negotiators. They negotiate the price fiercely. It goes up, it goes down. Once that price is decided upon, there is a bill of sale that is signed. And that bill of sale lays out an incredibly complex way in which the money is going to be paid out to whoever bought this city or whoever sold this city. And then this way of thinking about buying and selling gets embedded into political culture in all sorts of kind of odd and interesting ways. So I think that's the kind of one of the big findings. Well, I mean, there's first the, in terms of the big findings of the article and then the larger book. On the one hand, there's just how vast, for Florence, the article looks at Florence buying Pisa and trying to buy Lucca. when the Florentines try to buy Pisa, they have to draw in money from all across the peninsula to actually do this. So even though it's this kind of, I mean, it starts off as really this very parochial story, right? I mean, one Italian city buying another Italian city, but it ends up kind of going a much further than that, because of what these financial networks are trying to do. And then I think the other payoff that I really only kind of appreciated in the last few months as I was revising the manuscripts is just how anxious early Renaissance Italians are about state formation.
Fascinating.
Yeah, I really think that, and this is something I've been thinking about a lot, which is that even if you're a power like Venice or like the Venetians or like the Florentines, who are the ones who are conquering, who are the ones who are acquiring these territories, that, I mean, that causes a lot of anxiety because you're, as a power, you sort of, you're a republic. Why are you doing this? You know, that's something that tyrants do. And I think that thinking about territorial conquest as something akin to buying a piece of merchandise is actually very comforting to a lot of people, because it's a way of understanding territoriality in the language of commerce, which is something that these merchant republics, the people who are in charge of these merchant republics, are very comfortable with. They understand commerce. They understand how to drive a good bargain. And that's actually what the title of the article is. It's the art of Mercato, and Mercato is both the physical place, the physical market, but also the deal that's made. So if you can do a little bit of Italian there, you can figure out what the title actually says.
Right. No, I felt that was one of the more fascinating aspects of the article, is that it puts it in a framework that, as you say, you know, Renaissance and early modern Italians can understand, and, you know, sort of a language that they can understand and, you know, make sense of, you know, sort of what's going on. I'm very curious about your sources. You talked a little bit in the article about the sources you're using, but I'm always like the rest of us, I will always want to hear more about your sources and what you work in the archive.
Right. I mean, it was a real challenge with this project, because there is no central archive in any of these cities that relates to the buying of other cities, right? It's not as if the Venetians kind of have their own separate magistracy where they buy parts of their Aegean empire, and that you can just go to that one archival source and kind of go through their accounting records, which is really fun, right? I mean, because that's, if I could go back at the beginning of my dissertation and kind of redo it, I would have found a register like that, and it would have been a much simpler process, because you can, you know, you can read it from beginning. You have to make it modest, but you can read it from beginning to end, and then you do that. And there's nothing like that for this. Instead, what I really had to do was just throw everything in the kitchen sink at it. You know, I look at private letters, I look at chronicles, I look at council debates, I look at promissory notes, didactic texts from Emirs of Princes for the people who are selling these cities. But I think, you know, kind of my two favorite sources, which are completely different. One, I do a bit in the article. I mentioned kind of one image where there's this image from Giovanni Sercambi, who's a Lucchese chronicler, where it's an image of a city being sold, and you can really see. I wish I had more space in the article to talk about it, but I kind of graphically, that image is the image of a merchant selling his product. It's so obvious when you look at the pictures of merchants in manuscripts that it's the same iconography, right? He's using the same hand gestures. This is just another piece of merchandise being sold. So I've really enjoyed working with that. And then for the book, I'm also looking at traveler accounts, Italian traveler accounts. So it's really been fun, because, you know, these travelers who go to Asia and to the Levant, and what I found is that they're talking about other people, so Turks and Muslims and Greeks buying and selling cities, which it's worth saying they're not doing. That's a complete fiction. But these are Italians kind of taking their ideas about how political geography and how territoriality and how sovereignty kind of function, and traveling it with them to the East, and projecting their understanding of the world onto people there.
Right.
And so you get these really fantastic descriptions of Jerusalem being sold by the Pisans, and that's why the Pisans get bought by the Florentines, because it's God's punishment because they sold Jerusalem to the Mamelukes or something like this. I mean, it's just completely, it goes in these completely bizarre mythological directions, but ends up being these really rich, fun sources. So I really enjoyed working with those.
Yeah, that sounds great. I mean, I'm sure those are
fun.
really fascinating sources to work in. Yeah.
It was kind of, I kind of stumbled upon, right. I mean, a lot of it was just kind of serendipity, where I kind of found one traveler account and I was like, oh, maybe I should look at these more. And then I figured, I realized it was coming up all the time. Right. Yeah, much more. I hadn't kind of intended to write a whole chapter about that, but I ended up doing it. So
well, it's the best kind of archival work. And, that is definitely one of the things that struck me, as I was reading your article is the wide range of sources that you're using to put together, this picture, this different aspect of state formation that, we haven't necessarily previously considered. So I do want to go back to state formation because it's such a big topic in, Renaissance and early modern Italy. And so the big question is, do you think we're swinging back around to doing more work on state formation?
I know you want me to give a kind of definitive answer here.
Yeah, I know this is I'm putting you on the spot with a fairly
no, not at all. Well, I would say that in terms of where I'm coming from historiographically in the article and in the book is kind of there's sort of two threads, right? I mean, there's state formation and then there's economic culture.
Sure.
Because I originally, when I originally began this project, it was all about state formation. And you've read Giorgio Chittolini and Elena Fassino,
of course,
all these classics. And for those people out there who are watching this and don't know, right, there was this incredibly rich debate within Italian historiography about where we put the Italian state. Because of course that's almost oxymoronic, right? I mean, if you're looking at Italy from the point of view of certainly someone in the Risorgimento, but even in the 1960s and 1970s, it looks like a failed state in a way, right?
Sure.
Italy nationalizes very late. It's always kind of broken apart, and there's still this localism that remains. And so, what do we do with this? Why doesn't Italy function like France, and why does it function like a more centralized monarchy? And what Chittolini and Guarini and other people did, and so brilliantly, was say, no, actually, Italians did have states. They just had them in a different way, right? They organized them in these regional kind of polities. And I think that's still an incredibly rich and important historiographical tradition. What I really try to do in my work is, while I'm talking about the creation of regional states in a deep way, to show that process extends way beyond their borders. That again, to make a regional state doesn't just involve people within that regional state, but this vast network that goes outside of it. So if you are Venice and you are buying Zara, you need to raise money in these incredibly esoteric ways and spread them around Italy. If you are Lucca and it's 1369 and you are buying back the vicariate from the Holy Roman Emperor because they used to be owned by Pisa, then if you're Lucca, you need to borrow money from Florence, you need to borrow money from the Pope, you need to borrow money from the Carrara, who, because the Carrara ends up getting expelled, they don't pay back. It just becomes this massive web, and you realize that these states are it's not an individualized process, it's a kind of group collective process. And that's really, if you're asking me about state formation, that's what I think, is that we don't want to think about it in this kind of individualized way, but as a broader kind of collective process. And then, like I said, the second thread is economic history, or economic culture, and kind of how that gets infused into this entire narrative. So I don't know if I answered your question. I hope I answered.
You did. No, you definitely did. You definitely did. No, and I think you bring up some really important points, and talked about like where we're at. I mean, we're coming back. I think we may be coming back around to re-examine, some of the aspects of state formation. And I definitely think your work is an important part of that. So
Yeah.
yeah, excellent.
Yeah, great.
So one last question.
Sure,
Tell
sure.
us your favorite cafe that you go to when you're on your archival breaks.
So I have to.
You can do
I have to
multiple
admit,
cities. That's totally fine.
right? I do admit you gave me these questions beforehand. So to a degree, I've thought about this answer a bit. And I didn't want to offend anyone, and I didn't want to get myself, if I ever tried to go back to a cafe and somebody ever watched this, that I can go back. So I've decided to go with a very political answer, which is my favorite coffee in all, actually, and this is true, my favorite coffee in all of Italy, especially because I haven't been to the archives in a bit because of the pandemic, is the archive, or is the coffee in the archive. Yeah. The espresso,
good
I mean, you know
answer.
exactly what I mean. There's something incredibly endearing about those. Yeah, if you've ever been to an Italian archive, you know this. There are espresso machines in the break room. They cost about 80, or last time I checked, it's 60 to 80
€80.
cents.
Yeah. 80 euro cents. Yeah.
And then you have to pick the sugar amount, and I always screw that up, and I get the max sugar rather than the least sugar, and it drops down in a little cup, and you can swirl it, and you can have 7 of them a day if you're in the archive and you're really trying to move through your documents. And there's something I adore that.
Yeah.
Even though you could pay 20p more and go and get a good cappuccino down the street, or depending on the time, espresso. There's something just incredibly endearing about having your coffee in the archive, sort of taking a 5-minute break and then just bounding up the stairs back to the documents. I think there's something great about that. So that's probably my favorite one.
That's a fantastic answer. And now we're all nostalgic for, going and making our archival coffee break. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Michael. I've really enjoyed that. I really appreciate hearing more about your work, and I look forward to hearing more about your book when it comes out, and more about your work in the future.
Thank you so much. This has been great.
Thank you.
Have a lovely day.
You too.